day.
Rabbits have a mixed reputation in Britain. Some see them as cuddly, inoffensive creatures from their childhood, like Peter Rabbit or Little Grey Rabbit. Others, having read Richard Adams's book, Watership Down, might think of them as resourceful and determined. To farmers, they're a destructive pest, costing their industry £30 million a year in lost crops. Before rabbits became a pest, they were an asset to the farmer, who could catch them and sell them as meat and skins. Later, because of the damage they did, farmers began to persecute them. In 1954, when a virulent plague nearly wiped out the rabbit population, most farmers were delighted. A lot of townspeople were very upset to think of their favorite wild animals dying a disgusting death in the open fields. Millions of rabbits died, but the population recovered from its apparent death sentence. Every year, at harvest time, the sentence is reviewed. This is Wimpole Warren, a huge rabbit city over 100 years old in sloping parkland that has never been ploughed, an ideal place for rabbits. It's the dawn of a new year. In the early morning, the rabbits are making their way home. A fieldfare is looking for its first meal of the day, but the rabbits are replete. They have been feeding all night. Their mainly nocturnal habits help them to avoid their many predators. At night, while they're feeding, rabbits tend to pick up twigs and dirt in their thick coats. Before they return to their burrows to sleep, they clean themselves meticulously for comfort and hygiene. The most important rabbit here is this male. He's easily recognizable by the black marks above his eyes, scars which show that he's recovered from myxomatosis. Black Scar, as we'll call him, is the dominant buck in the warren. He's very aggressive in defending the territory round his burrow. Intruders know where the boundary of his territory is because he marks it with a scent gland under his chin. The trials of strength at this time of the year serve to establish Black Scar's dominance over all the other male rabbits. He seems to be feeding quietly, but he moves ever closer towards a rival until he's near enough to attack, then sends him packing. Because he has the best feeding ground in the warren, Black Scar is bigger and stronger than the other bucks, and a threat is usually enough. When he comes into conflict with his closest rival, the second-ranking male, the fighting can become very violent. While buck rabbits are aggressive on the surface, their life underground is a different story. In a crowded burrow, there's no room for fighting. Someone could get hurt. Below ground, rabbits remain on friendly terms. There's a strong bond between a buck and his senior doe. She takes the initiative in choosing a burrow, and he then protects the surrounding feeding grounds for her. Rabbit society is subtly dominated by the does. Each extended family is a matriarchy, ruled by the senior females. Scent is important, especially underground. The familiar twitching nose of an alert rabbit exposes the most sensitive parts of its nostrils. Back on the surface, Black Scar, too, is sniffing what the wind brings him. He knows all the rabbits in the warren individually by their smell. At present, he's looking for his principal mate. When a doe is about to come into breeding condition, she sometimes actually moves towards her mate. It's one of the few times she seems to notice his existence. Otherwise, she merely tolerates him as the defender of her burrow. From December to June, the doe will become receptive every 7 days until she is fertilized. This time, the courtship doesn't lead to mating, and she moves off. To keep other suitors away, Scar uses a maneuver known as enuration. He approaches a subordinate buck and sprays urine on his coat, which has the effect of driving him immediately underground. Some buck rabbits live as solitary nomads for part of the year. They've probably been forced out of an overcrowded warren. Since males don't dig burrows, they have to live on the surface, anywhere they can find good grass, until the breeding season begins. In January, they often travel for miles in search of a mate. This one is trying his luck in Black Scar's warren. Against the rightful owners, he stands little chance. Perhaps, if he's lucky, he might be able to shelter in a burrow somewhere near the edge until he can win a mate and the long-term use of her burrow. At the center of the warren, Black Scar is courting his doe once more. He adopts a more delicate approach, and she allows herself to be pursued. Feeding like this, in daylight, is usually a ritual. The serious feeding's done at night. This time his advances are better received. 3 weeks later, Scar's doe will give birth underground. The warren is a safe place for her young, just because there are so many rabbits around, all on the alert for danger. Hares have no such security. They live solitary lives in the open fields, bringing up their young in shallow nests on the ground, called forms. Hares are among our oldest inhabitants. They've been here for 100,000 years, long before the rabbits arrived. In fact, we know when rabbits came to Britain to within a few years. They were brought in by the Normans soon after the Battle of Hastings. Kilpeck Church in Herefordshire is one of the finest Norman churches in Britain. At its east end, the masons embellished it with cartoon-like characters, showing that by the 12th century the rabbit was well known here. For 600 years there was no such thing as a truly wild rabbit. They were kept in warrens, under the watchful eye of a warrener, who sold their meat for the pot and their fur to a furrier. The warrener culled a certain number each year and left the rest to carry on the stock. One of the ways of catching rabbits was ferreting, a method that continues unchanged to this day. The first job is to cover all the holes and emergency exits with nets, carefully pegged down. Rabbiting these days is not mainly for food. The rabbits which the Normans cultivated so carefully escaped, and in the open they bred like rabbits. Now the damage they do to crops and timber costs about £30 million a year. Ferreting is one way of controlling their numbers. When the nets are in place, a ferret is taken from its carrying box and introduced into a burrow. It doesn't always perform perfectly. Some ferreters like to work with 2 ferrets at the same time. Well-established warrens are a maze of twisting passages with as many as 10 different bolt holes. Escape is easy, both for the rabbit and the ferret. This is a polecat ferret, or fidget, a breed whose scent rabbits find particularly frightening. The thundering of feet inside the burrow indicates that they've caught wind of it. As the rabbits come out, the rabbiter is there to kill them as quickly and painlessly as possible. The light-colored coat and pink eyes of the other animal show that it's an albino, a true ferret. Its scent, too, means danger to the rabbits. When the scent gets too strong, they bolt for the open air and into the catcher's nets. For some rabbits in the warren, there's no cause for concern. Walled up in a side alley off one of the main burrows, these youngsters are isolated from predators and also from their father, Black Scar. That's just as important, because he'd eat them if he found them. They can clean themselves from an early age. The young rabbits, or kittens as they're called, are now 3 weeks old. The doe has made one short visit each day to feed them, digging her way in and then walling them up again as she leaves. When they grow up, they'll have to dig their own way to freedom. One cool April day, the next generation of rabbits takes its first look at a new world of light and color. This is one of many litters that will emerge during the breeding season. Each year a doe may produce up to 6 litters of as many as 6 babies each, 36 hungry mouths for the unfortunate farmer to feed. For the first few days the family sticks together, but the young soon have to learn to fend for themselves. Their mother mated 2 days after they were born, and she will soon be preoccupied with her next family. Among Black Scar's offspring, one is marked out for higher things. We'll call him Blaze, after the characteristic white blaze on his forehead. At present, he's just one of the new season's young, but we shall see him again. As Blaze and his brothers mature, and the warren becomes more crowded, life will become harder. Soon they'll lose the privileges of youth. The older bucks will start to bully them when they see them as rivals. For the moment, all is peace. Rabbits eat up to 1 pound of grass a day. Unlike cows, they don't chew the cud to get the best from it. They digest the food twice by eating their own pellets. If they didn't, they would have to eat twice as much grass. It's a habit they share with their relatives, the hares. By June, the warren is teeming with rabbits. Many of the youngsters are living on the surface for lack of burrow space. A rabbit without a burrow is a sitting target for predators. Man and his ferrets aren't the only animals that spell danger in the warren. Rabbits are born with one great disadvantage. They're delicious to eat, and they're the favorite food of every carnivore that's big enough to catch them. A rabbit is the biggest animal a buzzard can kill, and one that's well worth the effort. During the breeding season, buzzards depend on rabbits as food for their young. While the buzzard is the rabbit's principal enemy from the air, their most famous predator hunts them on foot. In the summer months, foxes don't depend on rabbits for their survival. They also enjoy fruit, beetles, game birds, and voles. But it takes more of these to get the same amount of protein as they can obtain from one rabbit. This fox isn't hunting. He's probably fed already this morning and is off to doze through the day. The rabbits seem to sense this, and some of them don't bother to bolt for cover as he lopes past them. There's one predator that can follow them underground. It's the stoat, an animal that might have been designed specifically to catch rabbits. stoats get most of their food from the warren. In 1954, many stoats starved to death when at least 95% of the rabbits in Britain died. They had been killed by a virulent plague introduced from France. Myxomatosis is a horrible disease. In its final stages, the rabbit becomes paralyzed and blind. At first, people didn't know how the disease was transmitted, though they knew that it occurred mainly in the breeding season. Later, they linked it to the rabbit flea, which can breed only after feeding on the blood of a pregnant doe. An infected flea transmits the virus as it bites. During the spring of 1954, almost every rabbit that was born picked up the fleas, contracted the disease, and died. The British landscape changed as a result. The grass grew longer and the hedges spread into the fields, but the corn sprang up as never before. The British taste for rabbit pie changed too. This race of crippled creatures was no longer seen as fit for food. But the rabbits held on, and although the disease still occurs, their population is now back to what it was before the plague struck. Many of them have become immune to myxomatosis. Others, like these, can recover from it, scarred for life, but healthy. Probably the greatest rabbit killer today is neither disease nor stoats. It's a long, hard winter. The first rabbits came from Morocco and Spain. For their descendants in Britain, bitter weather is a fearful ordeal. Winter hits hardest on the edge of the warren, where the weaker rabbits don't have burrows to shelter in. They merely dig themselves a shallow scrape and trust that the cold weather won't last too long. Those at the center of the warren are better off. They can hole up underground for several days at a time. But burrow or no burrow, if the grass is covered for too long, all the rabbits will starve. Only about half of them, the biggest and hardiest, will survive through a hard winter. Those that were best nourished, with the more dominant positions in society, will be able to command whatever sparse feeding is available. In a really hard winter, the survivors are often those with the strongest stomachs. A rabbit which depended on grass would starve. When they can't find all the grass they need, they often have to turn to other foods, one of which is the bark of trees. In the springtime, the evidence of the rabbit's hardship remains, in the form of stripped branches with pathetic tooth marks. A few strips of bark can be the difference between starvation and mere hunger. These fallen branches are not a favorite rabbit food, but they show how hard the winter has been. Rabbits really prefer to nip young saplings in the bud. Together with bark stripping, this kills hundreds of trees in a snowy winter. The Forestry Commission and rabbits have always had a strained relationship. This tree, blown down by a storm, probably fed a good number of hungry rabbits. Rabbits cost the farmer a lot of money too. For him, they've always been pests. Myxomatosis lightened the burden, but not for long. In 1953, rabbit damage cost farmers £50 million. By 1955, the first year after myxomatosis, it was almost nil. Now it's approaching 30 million again. In spring, the damage doesn't look too bad. Just a few blades of wheat gone from the edge of a field. When harvest time comes round, the result is more obvious. The rabbits' nightly raids from the hedgerow have taken a toll of the crop. Scenes like these demand that rabbits should be controlled. For the survivors at Black Scar's warren, the winter is over, and the farmers' problems are starting to multiply again. Even some of the hardiest individuals have died, and that has meant a change in the cast of characters. When Black Scar died, the leadership of Wimpole Warren fell vacant, but not for long. Scar's son, Blaze, now rules the roost. Even after his first autumn molt, he still has his characteristic white mark. He found it easy to take control because he already inhabited the central borough. But he still has to enforce his rule with endless patrols to subdue the other males. So the cycle of the generations goes on, as it has here for over 100 years. Winter kills, but spring renews the population, and soon the warren is as crowded as ever. Even in the best years, it's never overcrowded. Rabbits have a form of birth control which prevents that. When the warren is full or food is in short supply, a pregnant doe can reabsorb the embryos within her, saving her energy to give birth at a more suitable time. Richard Adams's book, Watership Down, suggested that the buck is the head of the family, but in reality, the senior doe is in command. She allows herself to be mated only when it suits her, and, having decided where to live, she makes the burrow for her offspring and hides them from the male. His role is only to defend the territory. Plenty of human societies live in this way. It has enabled rabbits to take over Britain, perhaps too completely. We have to decide what to do about it. Rabbits in the wild make the British countryside a more enjoyable place. Even though they're underground for most of our waking hours, when we can see them, they seem charming and eminently lovable. A farmer trying to grow a good crop of wheat might not find them so endearing. But even to farmers, rabbits are good to eat. That's why they're in Britain at all. Even though wild rabbits are still somewhat out of favor because of myxomatosis, rabbit meat is gradually being accepted again for human consumption. The answer to the rabbit question might involve a return to the purpose for which the Normans introduced them. Regularly cropped and humanely killed, rabbits could provide a source of good quality meat while their numbers were kept in check. The countryside needs rabbits, and not just for their charm. They hold back the spread of hedgerows and trim the grass on the downs, for example, preserving the beauty of the scene of which they're such a favourite part. Though they may not be as harmless as they look, there is a lot to be said in their favour.
Well, tomorrow we pay our regular Friday visit to the animal sanctuary in Wildlife.